Okay, I think it started now. And this is Paul, NO0T from the Front Range 6-meter group. Very good evening. And we're very fortunate to have Peter at KA6U to give us a presentation on his multi-band Rover setup that he's got going. He's going to be covering the US quite a bit this summer. He's going to tell us all about it. Just a little background on Peter. He started actually in ham radio at 11 years old in 1967. And he's pretty much got interest on every band and everything, including EME. So when I think of Peter's travels in the last couple of years, I keep thinking of that song, I've Been Everywhere. And I think he can probably say that for sure. So with that, I'm gonna shoot it over to Peter, and if you have anything else to share about your background, please go ahead. Otherwise, just dive right in.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So my cover picture here is, this is from the site, the Project Diana site, where the first moon bounce operation occurred in 1946. And I have some better pictures of this coming up. But on September 20th of last year, they opened up the site, and the dish there, that's a 60 or 70 foot dish that they use for radio astronomy, but they also have 1296 EME on it. So this is at moonrise, and I was running that small antenna set up in the left on 2 meters, and they were running the big antenna on 23 centimeters. So we were both running at the same time. So there's an amateur radio club there. But that was a great activity, and I'm actually going back there this summer. They run a STEM program for high school students. So I'm planning to go back for a couple of days and do a session on amateur radio and moon bounce and so forth. And I'll have both my 23 centimeter and then my lower frequency station set up also. But this was one of the very interesting stops I had an opportunity to do last year. So a little bit of background. I started as a shortwave listener when I was 9 years old in 1965 with an old Hallicrafters SX62. Then I was licensed, as Paul said, in 1967. I operated HF primarily through 2008, and I really enjoyed the roving. During national parks on the air, I did over 8,000 QSOs. I visited 22 national parks in the western 2/3 of the US and many other sites. And I believe there were about 1 million QSOs during the national parks on the air. So I made almost 1% of the QSOs during national parks on the air. So I did things like I went to Kings Valley in California, and I operated from the bottom of the valley and also 12,000 feet up on one of the mountain peaks there. So I did all kinds of different treks to the national parks and so forth for the national parks on the air. So I really got started in VHF in 2018 doing some meteor scatter work from San Jose, where I lived at the time. And I found that pretty interesting. And then made my first EME contact. It was on 2 meters. It was in December of 2019 with UA3 PTW. I was using a single 17 element 2 meter Yagi and 150 watts. I was able to make a few QSOs, and that really hooked me. And then starting in 2020, I started doing roving. And while I was still living in California until a year and a half ago, I did a lot of roving in the Western US, all the way from Washington, down through California, Nevada, activated many grids in those areas, primarily on 2 meters. And I also did some 6 meter ES. And then I moved to Florida in November of 2021? Is that right? No, 2020. And last summer, I visited 31 states. So I visited every state east of the Mississippi River, plus a few on the western side of it. And I did 44 grid activations. So there are two focuses on that trip. One was 2-meter grid activations, and another was to try to help operators who were working on 222 worked all states, work the states that they were missing. And I'm very pleased that I know we have 6 or 8, something like that, new 222 WAS certificates granted this year or in the last few months. And I heard that there hadn't been any granted in 35 years. So that was a lot of fun helping with that. And then I had one really great 6-meter activation on that trip. I went to Quill Hill in Maine. It's FN 45, and I have a great picture of that coming up. So I'm going back to Quill Hill this year, and I understand FN 45 is still one of the in-demand 6-meter grids. So I'm going to try to be there for probably 2 days in June. So I'll coordinate with the FFMA folks and whoever's appropriate to try to make that more visible. So here's Quill Hill. Actually, it was more than 114. I think it was 154 QSOs. This is amazing. This is private property, and this guy built this park just for his neighbors. So this is my truck set up there on top of the hill. It was interesting. I had the antenna pointed at Arizona. I forget the call sign. There was an operator. All he needed was FN 45 to complete FFMA. So for about 5 hours that day, I just kept the antennas pointed in his direction, and I worked people in pretty much every state east of the Rocky Mountains, all the way from Montana to Texas, and all the states in between, all the way to the East Coast without moving my antenna. But I could not get across the Rocky Mountains. So I will go back to this location. And as you can see, it's a pretty magnificent place. And then I'll be running stacked 6M3 Yagis. And when I put my steel mast up to maximum height, it's 32 feet high. And I'll be running 800 watts on FT8 most of the time. Though if the band opens up, I might get on sideband also. So my strategy in doing these activations is continuous improvement. And my number one objective is I want to be able to complete a QSO with everyone who can hear me. So to do that, certainly I need to have enough power to be heard, but I also need to be able to receive as well as I can transmit. So I've found that operating with on digital modes, operating with 700 watts output and very short feed lines to antennas. So, basically 700 watts, that gives me really good symmetrical performance. And in most conditions on most bands, I can work everyone that I can hear, and I seem to be heard pretty well. So that's the top level objective. The next objective is to have faster setup and teardown time. So when I first started operating on 2 meters, I only had 300 watts power. So every time I stopped, I was putting up 4 Yagis, and each Yagi had 10 horizontal, 10 vertical elements. So, 4 times 10 HV. And it took 2.5 hours to set up the station. So with the way I have my station set up now, I can set up from parked until on the air on 23 centimeters is 15 minutes. And to be on the air on 2 meters 222 or 432 is about 20 minutes. And I can be on the air on 6 meters in 10 minutes from when I stop. So that this faster setup and teardown really, it removes any excuses for not stopping somewhere to do an operation. So I was driving over to Texas yesterday, and I stopped. I just made a side trip, stopped in Mississippi, set up the station, made one contact to help N1AV Jay get his 40 knot state on 2 meters. And it was a 15-hour drive for me that day, so I didn't have time to operate, make lots of contacts. But for 15-minute setup and teardown, it's worth stopping, even for one QSO. So I do a lot of work on reliability, and I have lots of spares. I have spare amplifiers. I will have this summer spare amplifiers even for all bands except for 70 centimeters. And I have spare exciters and generators and rotators and so forth. What I found though is it's very unusual that I've had to use any of my spares. Initially, when I first started operating, I did. But now what I do is, as you could expect now, most problems have to do with cables. So what I do now is every year I replace all my cables, whether I need to or not. And then I, also inspect cables, because setting up and tearing down and dragging things out of the bed of the truck and across the ground it's particularly hard on cables, I found. So that's been an important thing. Also, doing careful advanced site selection. So last summer I did 44 activations, and every activation was successful. And I defined success as being able to work, in most cases, everyone who tried to call me. So in some cases, that was as many as 70 stations on 2 meter EME and 1 moon pass. So in order to do that, and I'll talk about this some more in detail, I use Google Earth Pro. And then also when I go on my trips, if usually I'm able to pretty well guess, certainly about access to the sites. I've been able to, haven't had surprises with that, but most of the sites have been pretty quiet from an RF noise standpoint, because I found, can someone mute whoever that is?
Smith Center is brought to you through the consideration of Redmond and Bread Supporter.
Someone's advertisement. Okay. I found that with my portable stations, I'm usually receive limited. So I'm heard better than I can hear whenever I have an issue. So picking quiet locations is important. And also because using smaller antennas makes it easier to set up and tear down. Again, having a good quiet location works well. I do whatever I can to increase the QSO rates. So I've found different strategies for operating on different bands that work pretty well. And for example, when I get on 2 meters, when I do grid activations, I can often have a pileup that lasts for 5 or even more than 5 hours. And RAFA is usually one of the last ones that I work on some of the pileups. But I've found just a certain strategies for, depending on the conditions, how I operate, what polarizations I use, when do I switch polarizations, when do I get to the point where I take the time to even switch polarization between transmit and receive. Sometimes I have to do that during challenging Faraday situations. And rapid polarity switching is really critical. So on 2 meters, I just use 2x10 HV antennas. That's all I use. And they work extremely well, but that's because I can switch polarity. Electronic switching for polarity, it works really well. And for my 222 and 70 centimeter antennas. I can reach those from the ground. And the way I mount the antennas, I can just grab onto the back of the boom and rotate the antenna. And I can even do that in between transmit and receive, as long as I pay attention to when the transmit cycle is. And then minimizing any source of receive noise I can. So when I first started roving, I found my truck was generating all kinds of noise. It was actually the stuff that I put in my truck that was generating noise. So over the last couple of years, I found particular laptop computers that are quiet at RF. Switching power supplies that I use are quiet. USB cables can be notoriously bad. So I found a really good quiet USB hub. And all of the USB cables that I use in the truck are very short. And now I can point my antenna arrays at the truck and I don't hear more noise. So that's a huge improvement from in the past where I'd have S9 noise when I point at the truck. But even when, if I have S9 when I point, you know that that's impacting me even when it's off the back of the array. So minimizing receive noise is very important. And then when I first started roving, I was dry camping. I'd go on a 7-day trip through the Eastern Oregon and Washington desert, dry camp in a tent. Sometimes, go up to the top of a 7,000-foot mountain for 2 days. So now I drag a nice RV trailer with me, and I operate in a truck with a lot of room and air conditioning and ergonomic considerations. So comfort helps a lot, particularly when you're trying to activate as many days as you can. So I try to complete with every caller, but there's one occasion here. This is actually, the antennas are pointed on the other side of those trees are the Atlantic Ocean. And there's one particular station in Italy that I hadn't completed with. And so I think he sent some kind of signal that turned my antennas red. So I got with the program and I completed with him before I stopped operating that day. But this, on my trip last summer, I had at least 10 stops where I was right on the Atlantic Ocean. So I activated many of the grids. Actually, over the last 2 years, I've activated almost every grid on the Atlantic Ocean from the Florida Keys up to Maine. Not all of them, but I'd say at least 2/3 of them. And it's really fun to do those activations. And one thing I found is whenever I can find a boat launch ramp is a fantastic place to do an activation. They're normally open 24 hours. If they're on the water, particularly on the ocean, there usually aren't a lot of tall trees around. You can run generators and no one complains. And there are really very few rules. So boat ramps and national forests are my two favorite operating locations for similar reasons. So this is how I travel now. This is my portable QTH. Though all of my operating gear actually fits in the truck or on it. You'll see a better picture here in a few minutes. And I keep spares and so forth in the RV trailer, but I can take everything I need will fit in the truck. So here's an example of a typical 2-meter activation. So I have 18 signals on the waterfall. My record of signals that I counted at one time was 30 at the same time on the waterfall. So if you do the math, let's say you have 30 stations and you can do 12 to 14 QSOs per hour. Some of those people are going to wait. You'll have to wait at least 2 to 3 hours. But what happened is, as the summer went on, people learned that I would stay on until everyone who wanted to make a contact, I could complete with them. And they learned that my station worked well enough that they didn't have to panic that they had to work me at moonrise. They could wait till later on. So probably by the middle of the summer, things, I could pretty much predict when different stations would come on. And though I had most QSOs at one stop was 75. And I ran for a couple of hours at 15 QSOs per hour, which is the maximum theoretical. The first 2 hours, I didn't have a single retransmission. And then I would have 13 or 14 for the next couple of hours. So that's when you know that your station is well matched to the people that you're trying to communicate with. So on 2 meters, I could easily work any 4 Yagi station that was running at least 300 or 400 watts, and I could work any 2 Yagi station that was running 1,000 watts, and I even worked a few single Yagi stations. So for site selection, for 6 meter roving, for 2 meters for all the roving, I use Google Earth Pro. And for example, this location here, like EN74, this is on the tip of one of the Great Lakes. And here, EN67, this is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So last summer, for example, I activated every grid in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Because I grew up in Michigan and I did a lot of camping in the UP 50 years ago. So I actually went back and visited a number of places that I'd gone camping. And then I just decided to activate all the grids. Now with the Google Earth Pro, the quality of the pictures, I can see power lines. I can even see what kind of power line it is. And I can see gates on roads. So there have been many times, actually there was only one time last summer where I picked a site that I wanted to get into where I ran into a gate that I didn't anticipate. So the Landsat photos on Google Earth Pro are really good. And I would typically spend, I probably spent an hour, at least, probably about an hour of planning for each stop that I made. And then fairly often, I would try to do activations like 4 days in a row, because usually it would be like starting at midnight, 1, 2, and 3 in the morning, and you can only do that for so many days, at least for EME operations. So often what I would do is on the first day, I would go to the furthest grid away. And then if I had any questions about the suitability of a closer in grid for one of the subsequent nights, I would stop there either on the way to or from. And there are probably 4 or 5 times during the trip where I made changes in my plans based on reconnoitering a particular location. So last summer, again, 31 states, 44 activations. I started the July 4th weekend, and I returned back to Florida the first weekend of October. So I drove about 8,000 miles on that trip. 1,500 of those miles were the side trip to go back to the East Coast to activate the Project Diana site because of the invitation to return there. And last year, I operated only 1 band at a time. But this year I'm planning to run 2 bands at once, and I've already tried that out on a few activations, and it works quite well. And again, so in the past, I was doing mostly 2 meter grids. So this summer I plan to try to operate 6 meters in all the stops that I make that are at a time of day that's suitable for either meteor scatter or ES. I'm going to try to be on those bands, and it's so easy for me to set up my 6 meter station now that I will do that. So this summer, my plan is 40 US states. And the focus is I want to do 6 meter rare grids. So think about the 40 states that are east of Utah, basically. I plan to be in all of those, and if possible, I'd like to activate, if they're rare grids in those states for 6 meters, I'd like to try to activate at least one grid in those states. Though in sometime in April, I'm planning probably toward middle or end of April. I'm going out to New Mexico, and I plan to be in that area of New Mexico, East Texas, maybe Southern Oklahoma, that area. I may be there for as much as a month, and I could do lots of 6 meter grid activations from some of those rather sparsely populated areas. So this would be in April. It's not ideal time. However, with the station that I have there, I should be in meteor scatter range for quite a few folks, I would think, from there. And you know, ES will be hit or miss. So I'll be doing some activations from April through May, but I'm starting the serious trip will be starting in June, and it'll run into October. And on this trip, I'm hoping to do at least 2,000 6 meter QSOs, again, with the focus being on grids that you know, probably a lot of the people here on the call might suggest. Just go ahead and drop me an email at my Gmail address, and of course, I'll look at the FFMA leaderboard also to help you select that. And then, as I said, I'm planning on putting doing activations on 222 and 23 centimeters with a focus on helping people with worked all states. And then when I come into 2 meter grids, they're in demand. I would also do those also. So I can operate 2 bands simultaneously, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. And again, I typically run 700 watt and digital modes on each band. And it's about 15 minutes again to set up each station, and I can switch bands in about 10 minutes. Because when I set up my EME tripod, which you'll see in a few minutes, I put the splitters for all of the bands. I just put those all up at the same time. So all I have to do is just snap on the other antennas and just connect them to the splitters that are already in place. And then I'm ready to go. So again, here's my tentative schedule. And then I'll announce on my blog page on the on this European page that tracks EME activities, and I'll send emails to the Front Range interest group for anything that involves 6 meters and also for 222. So I'm this presentation, I'm happy to make it available to people so you don't have to take notes if you want to keep any of these contacts. So you do see some interesting things when you're on the road. So people would look at my truck and say, wow, you have a lot of stuff on your truck. Well, this guy wins. Can you believe this? He's got a truck and some sort of golf cart buggy and some other type of buggy and bicycles and who knows. So I'd never seen anything like this, but he definitely wins. So this is the current RF deck in my station. So I'm using the ICOM Twins 9700 and 90, or should be 7300 as the exciters, and the 9700's GPS stabilized. And then I have an ICOM 705 that I can use as a spare. So all of my amplifiers can be driven to full output with just maximum of 7 watts of signal. So I can use the ICOM if I need to. Though I found that the ICOM gets a little bit warm if I use it all the time. So I've gone back to using the 9700 as the exciter, or these two, but as the main exciters. So I use 3 of the, I guess you pronounce it Tadch Fun, or that's how I pronounce it, amplifiers. These run day and night at 700 watts on digital modes. and on 70 centimeters, I only run it at 600 watts. The Harris amp, it can put out a full kilowatt, but I only run it at 700 watts typically. So I have a 23 centimeter pallet, or I built a W6QPL. I bought a pallet from him and built my own amp. Then before I go on my trip, I will have one of his fully featured 23 centimeter amplifiers. So my pallet amp will be the spare. And then I have spare 6 meter and 2 meter and 222 amplifiers. I have a spare Harris for 2 meters, and then I have a 500 watt spare amplifier for 6 meters. And I also have transistors to fix the amplifiers if I need to. But so far I've only had to repair one, which is the 2 meter one, or at least repair the transistors. And I use the Q5 transverters for 222 and 23 centimeters. And if my 23 centimeter transverter failed, I can use 9700 at baseband. So well equipped for spares in the RF deck, and usually I don't have to use them. I'm very careful when I set up. I do SWR checks of all of the antennas before I apply power to them. So I've never damaged anything. I've never damaged anything by an antenna issue so far, but I have had some amplifiers throw protection faults when the wind blew things around and shorted things, but otherwise no issue. So for antennas, here's what I've settled on. I have two 6M3s, and I can put 2 of them on the mast and with phasing for stacking. I don't have enough experience yet to tell whether the stacking makes a difference or not. If some of you have opinions on that, please drop me an email. And I thought about I used to have stacked 5-element Yagis for 6 meters, but I found the pattern was too narrow. And it really didn't help. When the 6 meter band was open, I didn't need the extra gain. So I found that with the broader pattern of the 6M3s, I hear many more stations. I seem to be able to work more stations faster. So I've gone through a variety of 2 meter antennas, and I'm using these 2x10 HV, so 10 elements on each band from antennas and amplifiers. And these antennas are extremely durable. The elements are heavy duty, hollow aluminum tube, pretty thick walled tube. And I have set them up and taken them down probably 150 times. I used to stuff them into my RX 300 SUV. Now you'll see how I carry them here in a few minutes. Much gentler on them, but extremely reliable. And I use the 2x16 K1FO designs from Directive Systems. And then I used 2x25 from Directive Systems. I have 4 of these antennas for 70 centimeters, and I could put them all up, but I've found that because I can switch polarity on 70 centimeters, that I don't need the 4 antennas, and it makes it much faster for setting things up. And I'm using one of Paul's 2 meter folding dishes. And I've tried a whole variety of different preamp and various configurations, and I've settled on an excellent preamp and cavity filter that's really helped my 23 centimeter performance. So this is the 32-foot steel mast that goes in a bumper hitch on the back of my truck. And when I lower the mast down, the tip of the mast is 9 feet high. So when I drive on the road, I drive with just the mast lowered, unless I'm pulling obviously the RV. But when I go on activation trips, I leave the RV. So with this set up, when I stop somewhere, if I want to go on 6 meters, all I have to do is snap an antenna. I have these quick snap release brackets for all the antennas. Just have to snap the antenna on, hook up the feed line, and I'm ready to go. Rotator, everything else is already installed. So literally, and all I have to do is put the antenna on the mast, push it up, put the generator on the ground and turn it on. I'm ready to go. So down here, there's I should have had close up of this, but at the bottom, here's the trailer hitch bracket. And then I have a high gain television rotator. And then right here, I have a piece of oak that goes into 2 pins in the back of the bed of the truck. Then I have an oak board that extends, and this is a Yaesu mast thrust bearing. So the mast goes up through this thrust bearing, and it provides plenty of support. So even in 25-mile-an-hour winds, I don't have to guy this, and it doesn't permanently bend. It moves around some, but this is one of the Roan 40-foot push-up masts. So what I do is I take out the smallest section. I just keep the 4 heaviest sections. Each one's 8 feet. And that's how I can end up with a 32-foot mast. So this whole mast rotates, and it rotates through the thrust bearing, and this works really well. And then on this, I can stick 1 or 2 6M3s. I often stick the 2-meter antenna, which you see here right now. I'll put that on the top, and I'll put one of the 6-meter antennas right here. And then I'll run 6-meter and 2-meter meteor scatter at the same time. And that works quite well also. And then I also can take one of the EME antennas and stick them up here also. I haven't done a lot of that. I've mostly used this for 6 meters and 2 meters. So here is my antenna tripod that I use, and this shows the 2 70-centimeter antennas. So I have some more close-ups of this, but basically the way this works is this is a folding 62-inch or something tripod, MFJ tripod that I buy from DX Engineering. And then this is the Yaesu G5500 Azimuth rotator. Here's the elevation rotator. And this is another one of these Roan push-up steel masts cut up in a certain way so that the heaviest section is held by this, held by the tripod, and then the next section down goes into the rotator, and this whole mast up here rotates. And then the elevation rotator hooks up. This is a 1.5-inch solid fiberglass pole, so it's very stiff, not too heavy. And this is the mounting location for the 70-centimeter antennas, and then both the 2-meter EME antennas and the 222 antennas. This is the right spacing for those antennas. So I can run to 82 degrees elevation, and everything still clears the way I have things set up. And this I can set this mast up, or I can set this up from when I park the truck until this is set up as 10 minutes. So and that's a big improvement. It used to be 45 minutes. So again, it's the incremental improvement. So here's a close-up I have for these 3 boxes with PVC pipe. There's 40 pounds of cement block in each one of these boxes. So I just drop the legs into the box, and that's usually enough. If it's windy, I use a bungee cord to hold the legs down. But otherwise, that's all I need to do. Again, it's very fast to set up. So this is last weekend. This is my 23-centimeter EME station. I set it up and ran it on Saturday and Sunday. So on Saturday, I worked 20 stations in just a couple of hours on 23 centimeters. And on Sunday, I worked fewer stations just because there were fewer stations on. A 23-centimeter station, right from the beginning, it worked great on transmit. And I've done a lot of things to improve the receive performance. I think it's pretty close to optimum for receive now, and that makes a big difference. So here's a close-up of the feed, and every 1/10 of a dB matters on 23 centimeters. So all of these fittings here, nice shiny fittings, these are all silver plated, and they're Pasternak. So these are very high quality commercial parts. There are no Chinese parts anywhere in the path of, well, this hybrid is, but everything else in the path is very high quality. This is a WD5 AGO 0.21 dB, 36 dB gain preamp. And this cavity filter that I added this last week makes a huge difference in rejecting noise, particularly noise from telecommunication towers, which was really impacting my receive performance. So since I added this cavity filter, it's made a huge difference. And this cavity filter is also silver plated inside. So it has 0.7 of a dB loss, which is certainly more than you would want at the beginning of your feed line for this band. But if I was in a very noisy environment, I can very easily put the filter in front of the preamp. But so far I haven't had to do that. But these are the kinds of things that, as I've been roving, I've tried all different types of preamps, and putting a preamp at the right at the EME mast, or having the preamp in the truck and just leaving it there. And what I found is I run 33 feet of LMR 600 from the truck to the EME tripod, and I put all of the preamps are in the truck. So that greatly increases reliability. There's many fewer things outside and many fewer cable connections. So this is my current setup for my exciters. And you recognize the ICOM, and then I have an M2 sequencer up here that I use. I use this for switching polarity, but I have backup or spare preamps, for all the bands and even different types of preamps. So most of the time now I'm using these preamps for advanced receiver research that I actually put in the path from the exciter to the input of the amplifier. And these are RF switch preamps that when there's 1 watt of RF, they switch. So that means I don't need to have a sequencer. Again, things get much, much simpler. I found that on 70 centimeters though, my receive performance wasn't what I wanted it to be. So I've actually moved the preamp back out to the EME tripod. But the way this works is these two exciters, they are attached to each other, and the sequencer's attached on the top. Over here on the right side, you can't see it. Here it is. This is my very low noise USB hub. There's only the single shielded USB cable that goes to my computer. I actually have a software defined radio that's mounted onto this side here. And when I run on 23 centimeters, I receive simultaneously with both the software defined radio and the exciter. And I use the software defined radio to search for other signals on receive at the same time that I'm completing a QSO using this radio. And you'll see this little wooden table back here. When I want to get underway, all I have to do is just pick this up as a unit. I'm sitting in the seat and just set it on that table. And all the cables remain hooked up except for this one USB cable that runs to the computer. So literally it's a couple of seconds to set this up or take it down. So it used to take me 15 to 20 minutes to set up the exciters and the patch panel for for operating, and now things are again much simpler. Then for computer, I found this very quiet HP laptop, and then my son found for me these two monitors that there's a bracket that just fits over the top of the main PC screen. So I have 3 high resolution monitors here. What this allows me to do is I run WSJT side by side here, 1 band on each. I have rotator control over here. This is the tuning for the software-defined radio. I use a SpectraView FFT program to real-time monitor the received signals, so I can watch what's happening with noise. And sometimes I'll see, big increase in noise, or if I see background noise start to increase, then I can understand why I'm getting worse signal to noise ratio, on my receive. And then I put chat windows over here. You can see this is really simple. This is a single USB cable coming from all the electronics. And then I have this table that it hangs here from the top of the, from the truck, and it's always here, and I can just drop it down out of the way. So again, this here just sets up in a couple of seconds. So USB is my kryptonite. So it's taken a lot of time and effort to find, well, the best USB cable is no cable. The second best is short. And then I found this particular shielded cable that works really well. And then by mounting this USB hub right on the side of the exciters, I only have 9-inch USB cables running from this. So those are very short, and I don't see any USB noise anymore. Here's a close-up of side-by-side band operation. In this case, I was running a software-defined radio here, and this is the radio I was using to run QSOs. But typically, I'll run like 6 meters here, 2 meters there, or some combination of the two bands. So I've done 2 operations like that on EME bands, and as long as I don't chat, it works out really well. And the folks on 2 meters don't really expect me to get on the chat pages anymore, so I typically don't. And everyone knows what I'm going to do pretty much, so I don't have to communicate it. Often though, on 222, because of the propagation challenges in marginal stations, some coordination might be needed. And also, I think one of the things I'd be interested in hearing from the 6-meter group is ideas about how to chat when I'm trying to do rare grid activations. And here's a close-up of monitoring screen noise here. And this is the rotator control. I also use this to monitor sun noise, so I can regularly re-peak the accuracy of my rotators by just going to peak on sun noise. So here's the 23-centimeter station. Can someone mute whoever that is? Thank you. So the 23-centimeter station, I built this very simple platform, wooden platform out of plywood, and I have 3 just iron pipes and floor, screw-in iron pipe with appropriate mountings, and I built just little wooden angle pieces on the bottom of this tripod. And then I use these 3-foot-long circus tent stakes. These are 1 inch in diameter. I just drive these into the ground and hook up these tensioning straps. So when I set it up like this, this tripod does not move at all. I can pull as hard on it as I want to, and it doesn't move. So then I have the Yaesu G5500 mounted here on the top. I have a counterweight here, which is a 20-pound dumbbell that I just drop in this box. And when the elevation gets above 50 degrees, I don't need the counterweight anymore. I just reach in the box and throw it on the ground. Then I use this digital protractor here to double check my elevation if I need to. So I have really good confidence now in my elevation. And because of my ability to peak on sun noise, if it's during the day, I'm able to very easily re-peak. So I run, this is the box that contains the current 23-centimeter amplifier and power supply. So it sits here in the truck, and I just have 4 cables here that just roll up, and they just run out to the dish, and I just have to plug them in. Those 4 cables are already coming out in a bundle. They're already always installed in the dish. And from parking to being on the air, having the dish set up and running is 15 minutes. So it's very fast. And then over here, here's the truck. I have 2 of these Honda generators with this external fuel tank. So when I run only one station on one band, I run one generator. When I'm running 2 stations, I run 2 generators. And this external tank holds enough gas that I can run 2 generators for 2 days of operation without having to refill it. And no pouring of gas directly into generators is required. So I've met a lot of very interesting people on my trips. 2 most common questions are you a weather chaser? But at least half the people ask me if I'm talking to aliens. Of course, the answer is yes. I'm talking to you guys. So I've had hundreds of people stop by on my trips. One of the interesting ones was this father showed up with 2 teenage sons in Connecticut, and he asked if I could give his boys a science lesson. So I sat them in the seat, and they ran the 2-meter station for the afternoon. So that was pretty interesting. I was in the Cape Hatteras National Park, and this young lady came up. She was 13 or 14. She was asking about amateur radio and so on. So she became the operator for the day, and she left with one of my QSL cards with a pointer to a website on how to become a radio amateur. And she was really interested in STEM and so on. So I think we might have a convert there. I made a stop in Louisiana, and this family came by and brought me homemade crawfish pie for lunch. And also on my trip, I had several visits while I was operating from operators I'd met on the moon, like this motley crew here in New York. You may recognize some of them. I don't know if any of them are on the call. This is the Project Diana site. This is where the first moon bounce happened in 1946. This is the antenna that was used. And this is where the dish, so this antenna isn't there anymore. This is where the big dish was, and I was set up right here on this road. So this building is still there with a new roof, and that was one of the buildings in the picture. So I had operated at the East Chatham at the Marconi radio site, and they called up the Project Diana folks, and they invited me to come up. So I did a side trip from Ohio back to New Jersey to operate there in September. And this is what my cover photo was. Here's an interesting picture. I had to wait for the tide in North Carolina. So this is the Atlantic Ocean. And in the middle of this, the water was 4 feet high. So I couldn't drive through it. So I knew this was going to happen. So I arrived there at about 1 in the morning, and I had to wait until 4 before I could get through. But it was just a beautiful evening. And I got to watch the tide go down very slowly for hours. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is on the northern shore of Lake Huron. So this is when you see the map of Lake Huron and you see the curved beach. Well, this is it. So this is sunrise, moonrise. This is the tip of northern peninsula in Michigan. So this was the first week of September, and it was 35 degrees that morning. So this is a 35-degree northwest wind blowing on the Keweenaw Peninsula. And of course, the next day it was 75. So here I was at South Dakota. Found a nice site. I just set up there on the side. And so this is operating in style. I was actually sitting in my RV, and I have wireless remote control of my station. So I was operating it wireless control from inside the RV. And on the top here, you can see this rack. So in this rack here, I carry the 2-meter antennas partially assembled. I carry the 2 antennas for 222. I had 4 antennas for 70 centimeters. I had 2 6-meter Yagis and a 2M7 for 2 meters. And this rack up top gets very full. And this box over here contains all the different masts and tripod and boom and so forth. And in the back is where the generators, power go and so forth. So here's at the top of Lake Michigan, and you'll recognize the shape here. So I went to the spot and nobody drove by all day. And that happened a lot in many of the places I went to. I tried to go to places as remote as possible, primarily because they'd be quiet. So this is a good view of the 2x10 antennas. They're long Yagis optimized for 2 meters. And you can again here see the setup where I just dropped the mast into the boxes. And all of the bolts here, I have a power screw or power bit, my drill motor and everything, I use power, it just tightens right up. So this is set up on Cape Hatteras. Interesting story here, I was starting to set up in a parking lot. So one of the rangers came over and he made a call to the special events director for the national park. And that guy got on the phone with me and he told me I could set up anywhere that I wanted to in the park. I could use generators if I wanted to. And all he asked was that, including the beach, all he asked was that I don't trample on any plants. And that was typical of the reception that I got, the different places I went to. All the places I went and activated in the last 2 years, over 100 locations, sometimes even showing up on places that I thought might have been private land, or where the landowner actually showed up. In all cases, I've been able to complete my activations. I haven't been thrown out of any place. And the reason for that is, is to be polite, show enthusiasm and present, what I'm doing as a public service, which I think it is. Here's a national forest in Mississippi. I love going to national forests. And I use the Google Earth to find areas of the forest that are clear cut. And I'm happy to drive 30 miles on a logging road like I did here to get to a location like this. So this is almost at the Canadian border in the tip of Maine. So this is a yearling female moose. And when I drive on these roads, even though I could drive a lot faster, I drive 25 miles an hour typically, because this kind of stuff happens all the time. Animals come running on the road. So I haven't hit anyone or anything yet. Here's Iowa. This is a typical picture of Iowa. This doesn't really do justice, but as far as you can see in the distance, there's corn and windmills. And some people say that my rig is pretty big. Well, it's not. These are my friends on the road. This was one of the more interesting stops I did. So this is the Nebraska River. So I'm right on the border. And here's a BNSF train going across this bridge. And it looked and sounded like a model train. And here's the moon up here. This was just one of these magical nights. I worked many stations on 2 meters. And then I put up the 222 antennas, and quite a few stations were able to get Nebraska for their worked all states. So that's the end of my prepared presentation.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Unbelievable. I don't think I've ever seen a setup as good as yours, Peter. That's just amazing. Do we have any other questions or comments from anybody?
So do you have you posted what your 40-state route is going to be with approximate times yet?
I haven't. That's a great question. So what I'll do is I need to find out for sure what my April and May schedule is. So typically what I'll, so depending on how that works out, I haven't decided yet whether I'll start in the west and work east or in the east and work west. So I haven't decided that for certain. Typically what I do is on my blog page, I'll typically keep a running plan for the next 5 days. I'll provide longer term guidance when I can, but usually I'm able to publish for 5 days. And when I do publish, I typically give the exact GPS coordinates. I'm often able to provide a satellite picture of where I'm going to be. and I have, very accurate times for different types of operation. When I'll be doing, 6 meters and 2-meter meteor scatter or whatever, or ES, and then when I'll be doing EME operations. So I will post an approximate plan. Last summer, I was extremely lucky with weather. I didn't have a single activation washed out by rain, though I did make some changes in my plans based on weather patterns, and that helped. So, for example, I won't be able to publish a 60-day plan, but I will know typically a full week in advance where I'm going to be. Now, something this last year is EME operations are usually really only good about 14 or 15 days a month. So what I'm planning on doing is, and also last year I was doing a lot of running around doing 2-meter grids. It's a lot of extra driving and work to try to find a good spot in every grid. But it's really easy to find, I can go to a 4-corner area of states, and then within an hour drive, I can find a good location in, each state. So it's going to be, it should be much easier for me this year. But the short answer is I plan to have at least 10 days in each month where the focus would be, for example, 6-meter meteor scatter or ES. And I'll do 2-meter at the same time because I can run the 2 stations at the same time. So I'm planning on probably at least 10 days of pretty much dedicated 6-meter and 2-meter ES, Tropo, MS, and probably 15 days of EME each month.
Peter, what kind of soft limits, whatever, do you have for operating wind, temperatures, rain, that kind of thing?
Good question.
You have a deal where you say it's going to be 45-mile-an-hour winds and I'm not going?
So I can operate and I can safely set up and tear down in 25-mile-an-hour sustained winds. So like my steel mast, I put that up and down in 25-mile-an-hour winds with some gusts, and I'm comfortable doing that. And I can operate in rain. I generally don't operate during thunderstorms. I've been on a couple of operations where, all of a sudden I was getting, I think, S9 plus 40 static, which means that my antennas were putting up a feeder, to attract lightning. So I disconnected. For example, helping Dave when I did that at one of the activations in Nebraska, it took us 4 hours to do it because I had to keep disconnecting for thunderstorms. But then I try to avoid weather. So I will adjust my routes to avoid weather. And weather forecasting is good enough now that I can usually do that. So the short answer is it's like, for example, I had no cancellations of an activation last year, summer or winter, because of weather. But then I made decisions about where I went because of weather. And there were cases where I skipped a particular place and then came back later when the weather was better.
Cool.
So
Well,
I'll operate in rain. I'll operate in pouring rain. I have a dry suit, from my days of sailing on the ocean. So my station is waterproof, though I won't operate the dish in rain. Even though I could, I just choose not to.
did you find any places where you were operating when the temp was above 100 degrees, or did you?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. So I can set up and tear down in over 100-degree temperature. I'm good with that.
I had and a question about the generators. Do you change the oil every few days or what?
No, that's a good question. I generally I change the oil after every 15 operations. So that ends up being about 60 to 75 hours.
Right, because I know those generators, they need to have the oil changed pretty frequently.
Yeah, so I find I use good oil in them, and I change, again, about every 75 hours. And they're running great. When I take the oil out, it's, I know that's a reasonable time because the oil still has good qualities when I take it out. So, yeah, good
Have
question.
you worn out some generators?
I have not. No. No, my generators. I have 2 generators. One of them has several hundred hours on it. Probably, I haven't been keeping close track, but probably 500 hours on it. And the other one probably has 200 hours on it. And they're both running, they're both running great. The exhaust still smells the way it did when I first started using them.
Do you use
So-
them with the speed control, or do you run them in full speed mode?
I run them full speed. I run them full speed because, when I'm running, 700 watts output, I'm running them at 1800 watts probably and they're 2200 generators, and they're absolutely solid at 1800 watts. But not if you run eco mode.
Right. Okay. Yeah, they do funny things when you throw 1500 watts at them.
Right. Good question.
Peter?
Yeah.
The dish feed on 1296, is that from Paul also?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Hey, Peter, this
Yes.
is Charlie N0AKC. Are you able to see me on the screen?
I can. Yes.
Okay, I want to show you something because this.
Oh,
was
very
one of
cool.
I was one of the lucky guys that completed 222 WAS, and Peter gave me 13 states to do that. So I just wanted to show you that I've got it. I was awarded number 16. So thank you so much for all of your help. It was a blast following you last summer, and hope to do some more of that this summer for some grids.
And
Absolutely.
Peter gave me 8 states as well on 222.
Yeah, and you're not on 222 anymore.
No, I can't get DXCC. I try to work 50 states and 100 countries on every band.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. Good point. Yeah, so so that there's an opportunity if people are interested in 222, my station works well enough, and it's going to work better this summer than it did last summer. That you have a chance to work most of the states this summer. But again, I would say 700 watts and 4 antennas would be ideal. Would make it a lot easier for me. So if you had 4 antennas and 700 watts, then we would probably be able to complete from every location. 2 antennas, 700 watts, I don't know, 65–70% chance in a single moon pass.
Peter, what generators are you using?
The Honda 2200 UI generators. It's a good question. Those are the 3rd generators that I've used. I'm glad I bought them when I did. They're selling now for $2,500, which is ridiculous. But there's a shortage of them. But the good thing about those generators, they are silent at RF. Absolutely silent, all the way from DC through microwave. I just can't hear any noise from them. I used to have line chokes. I built some big toroidal line chokes in toolboxes that I used, but I just stopped carrying them because I couldn't detect any noise, and just something else to carry around and set up. So highly, highly recommend those generators.
Peter, John W9J, and a question with the situation in the Ukraine and the prices of fuel and so on, is that going to be a detriment to any of your travels potentially, or no? Or,
I'm
and
gonna-
also,
I'm going to do the
also-
travels. It's just going to cost a lot more.
okay, so are there funds that are needed for reimbursement on your travels?
So normally I don't, however, given the cost of what fuel is going to be this summer, if people would like to contribute to that, I have a PayPal account that's the same as my email address on that's shown on my QRZ.com page. Yeah, my truck gets 12 miles a gallon when I'm not pulling the trailer RV, and it gets 8 miles a gallon when I am pulling the RV.
Peter, I don't remember. Is that a diesel or is gasoline?
It's diesel.
Okay.
Yeah, it's diesel. And I don't know why diesel fuel is so much more expensive than gas now, but it used to be the other way around.
Peter, this is Rick. You-
That
That wasn't me.
was
the,
Marshall.
Okay. You ask about chat and that kind of stuff and suggestions. And one thing I have thought of with other stations doing things is if you have a couple of stations that you can choose as guides or pilots or something like that, somebody that you know and knows what you do, that can get on the chat when the same question is asked for the 400th time, they can respond like, when are you going to be on? Where are you? What grid are you in? Blah, 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 all of those things. If you had somebody that could respond for you, it would say.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So what I typically do is I will always post, I'll always keep updated on my blog page, the current day and the next several days. So I will always do that. So that information will always be there. But those kinds of queries, if I'm on a chat page, that's a good point. I often will not answer those because I'm just too busy. So if I am on a chat page, that's a great idea. Asking somebody who's going to be following the operation, it'd be great if they could answer those. Thanks, that's a great idea. To answer the questions that people who haven't been watching might ask, because if they have those questions answered, it'll make my operation more efficient. So thanks, that's a great idea.
Cool. One other thing is if you're on Slack, you can dynamically change your name and whatever, and you can put your grid in there or whatever, those kinds of things so that every time you send a message, it says where you are.
Yeah, so I typically don't use Slack. And the reason is it uses up so much screen space and there isn't any history. So that's why I use I use PJ Client, and then I use the HB9Q reflector for 222, 432, and 23 centimeters. And I use PJ Client, which uses the, whatever that page is, the
Ping Jockey
EME
Central.
one page, Ping Jockey Central, yeah. So I use that for 2-meter operations. Yeah, so that's what I do. Hello, Peter.
AG6EE, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here,
Oh.
my life, watching.
So I don't do operations in the kind of cold anymore that Peter does.
Well, I don't like it either right now. I have to say that was pretty brutal, like 1 a.m, 7 degrees Fahrenheit, somewhere in DM18. That was not fun. That
No.
was crazy.
So I'll do 100. I'll do 105. I'll do 110 degrees. Um, partly now because my station is so much faster to set up and tear down. A couple of years ago, when I did the trip up in the Oregon and Washington desert area, it would be 95 or 100 degrees, and it was taking me 2.5 hours to set up the station. So that made for long, hot days. But now that I have the RV and the fast setup station, and it's very comfortable in my truck, both driving and operating. Also in my truck, I carry around with me I think it's an 8,000 BTU window air conditioner from a home that fits perfectly in one of the passenger side windows on my truck. So when it's hot out, I don't have to idle the truck. I just turn on the air conditioner and plug it into one of the generators. And it's very, very nice. It's nice and quiet, and it cools better than the truck does, and you don't have all that blowing air. So I didn't show that in my picture, but I do carry that with me for summer activations. And it works out great.
Interesting. I'm trying to build a bigger station, which is smaller, lighter, faster to set up, so I can pick it up like really to the car and get anywhere I want to go. Because like, especially in Nevada, like if you do a terrestrial, like especially 6 meter, you really want to get as high as you can get, and sometimes it could be fairly dramatic drive. Last year I was at Spruce Mountain, which is 10,000 feet high. And it was kind of interesting. Like the longest MSK I heard was 1,750 miles from Florida.
Wow.
It was really pinks. It wasn't like ES. It was pinks, but I have a 2-6 elements stacked, so stacking usually helps, but stacking helps only if you have a question. So stacking helps if you are in Nevada and like the first 1,000 miles, there's nobody. So you basically are really trying to shoot far.
Oh, right.
Stacking helps, like I can tell, like, 5 element Yagi, okay, it was okay. 6 element was way better, and 2-6 elements, like if I really need to reach somebody who's far, that's definitely dynamite.
Well, you know what I'll do this summer? Like when I go back to FN 45, if I can't reach, if for example, I can't reach Arizona, but I'm hitting everywhere else, like I can mount both antennas on my mast, and all I have to do is just is lower the mast and move 2 coax cables, and I'll have stacked antennas. So I could switch even.
Yeah, I mean that's the same experience. Like basically, like getting over the Rockies, it's difficult. Like like getting from west to the Rockies is easy, but then the hell starts, and exactly the otherwise. If you don't have an elevation, if you don't have a gain and everything, when I was like in DN 42 for 42, 52, everything was easy because I was basically on the edge of the Rockies.
Right.
And everything worked like a magic. Like if you are in DN01, well, it's a very different story.
It is, right.
Plus, like with 2-6 elements, I can easily work EME, easily EME, 6 meter EME, unless there's like a K5 or more, then it's a problem. But like up to K4, yes, I can work EME.
Wow.
And it gave the great lot of people. Very funny was like I was in DM19 last October when the Lance was on the expedition. And I got these 2-6 elements on 6, and basically my VST-JX screen looked like during summer FT8 opening, but except that all signals were like a 2.7 seconds late.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Wow. Pretty cool. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. But it's a really quiet place, and I was over. There is Salt Lake, so there's quite a bit of ground gain, and all together it helps.
Yeah, I was out in the Black Rock Desert
Yeah,
also.
I
I know you've been there several times.
I know that I sent you there.
Yeah, you did, and magnificent ground gain there.
Yep.
So I when I was there 2 years ago, I was looking at the cirrostratus clouds that were forming, over the mountains on the west.
Right.
And I started very quickly taking down my station. And I got it packed in my truck, and I was literally starting to drive away across a lake bed when the dust storm started.
Yep.
And I was driving 80 miles an hour across the lake bed, and I was staying just ahead of the dust storm. It would have made a good movie shot.
Yeah. I mean,
But I just made it.
if you ever been to Burning Man when this dust storms comes, like,
That's
you
where
can-
I was. I was at Burning Man. That's where I was.
You don't see your own hands, like
No.
the only way you can do, like, to step and stand by for an hour, because you can't move. You don't know where you're going.
Yeah.
You don't know where you are. You don't know anything. It's just
I
blind.
missed that by minutes.
Yep, I know what you mean.
So
Very-
actually, there was one place on my trip where I did get chased out, and I was activating down on the Louisiana. It was like EL 59 or somewhere down there. And again, I was right down on one of the the big lakes, and there's a remains of a tropical storm out in the Gulf, and the water started coming up. I could watch it start to come up. And by the time I got the station packed up and in my truck, the water was like almost up to the lower rim of my tires.
Wow.
But I think I'd completed with everyone by the time I had to escape. So those were 2 escapes, I'd say. But otherwise, no issues.
I mean, I activated a couple of grids. Like, interesting was CM86. That was against all the odds.
Right.
because We found the gate locked differently than we expected, and finding the ranger opening the gate and so forth. But again, with the Slack and with the chats, I told people on Friday I'll be on Sunday in the CM86, and people started asking me immediately if I'm already there. No, I'm at work. Boys. Just
Yeah.
read the RTFM. Simply like, I found I don't have a time either, like, to keep chatting. People kind of got used to that. They need a confirmation over chat for this or that. No way. I mean,
Yeah.
if I get busy, I get busy. I even like a late summer last year, like a mid-July, I was in DM 19 and 18 over 2 days. I made, like, I believe around 650 QSO in 2 days.
Wow. Yeah.
And partially without the internet. Like, I really don't have a time to talk to people.
Yes. Yeah.
Just
And I didn't last summer. I didn't have any busted QSOs from not chatting.
right.
Not a single one. So chatting is used way much more than it needs to.
Indeed.
And I finally convinced the 2-meter folks that they really didn't need confirmation from me, because if I was calling them, they knew I would keep calling them until the QSO was complete. And I did. So and it greatly reduces the stress for the for the rover, and particularly after you've been, my typical day would be leave my campground at 8 p.m., drive until 10 to the grid activation location, set up by 11:30, moonrise at midnight, operate until 5 in the morning, hour to pack up, and then drive back and get back at 8 a.m. So if you're spending, if during that 5 hours of operations, you're trying to keep up with people who are chatting, and
It's exhausting.
it's exhausting. And then like the self-spotting was getting really bad on 2 meters. And people, were, asking to be put in front of the line and so on. And so I just made a rule that if you self-spotted, I would call you last. And people stopped self-spotting. But something really interesting happened after that too, is a lot of people just started spreading the time out. Like I mentioned before, I sometimes saw 32-meter signals off the moon at the same time. That was at the beginning of the summer. By the end of the summer, when I first gone at moonrise, there might be 8 signals. And then there'd be 10 signals. And then next hour, there'd be 15 signals. And this would go on for, 4, 5, 6 hours. People pace things out, and it was so much nicer for me too.
Yep, I realize that. Yeah. One thing I'm probably doing very differently. What I realized, like, generators are good and generator okay, but I started using and moving everything on 48 volts, basically a lithium iron phosphate batteries in the middle. I found it basically continues like a parallel. I basically keep charging the battery, and I ran the switching supply and battery in parallel through there's like a Schottky diode. It's like a 150 amps.
Right.
So basically, the power supply can't charge the battery and vice versa. But they both deliver to the amplifier. So basically, I ran the generator on idle, and when the PA goes on, basically most of the power goes from the battery. But like,
oh wow,
in
okay, I
next 2
see.
seconds, basically it transfers completely to the power supply and to the generator. The advantage, basically, I'm probably taking 1/3 of the fuel. I mean, I can run with I put the gallon into the generator, and I can run for the weekend pretty much.
Yeah.
It saves
So
a
from-
lot of gas.
Yeah, so I don't use that much. The amount of diesel that I use going from place to place, I use more diesel in one day driving than I use in a whole summer of gas and a whole summer of operations.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, but like, it's like, is the generator is more quiet and everything is kind of easier on the generator, because what I found, especially it helps me in the high altitude locations where the generators were kind of
Doesn't work as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the generator doesn't have a problem to give me the power in 10,000. The generator has a problem to, time to get the power out,
Right.
So basically, if you give it kind of this battery support, the generator doesn't have a problem to really reach the full speed, but instead of second, it takes 5, and it's if there's no battery, it basically shuts down, so I realized that in these 8, 9, 10,000 feet elevations, like, the battery is really like comes to the rescue,
Wow.
because like
I hadn't thought of that. I'll definitely think about that. I have room to carry batteries. Was it about 300 pounds of batteries
oh boy,
or more?
no, but mine,
Yeah.
no, my battery is lightweight. Like, I mean, the battery, I carry the battery to the CM79, so it is like,
Oh, wow.
it's like a 30 pounds.
Just a single battery?
Yep. 40
And
little 30 ampere hours.
It's just enough to supply the power while the generator is.
I mean, by itself, it can give I can run a kilowatt like for 2 hours. By battery itself only.
Hey, better. This is Paul. We're gonna have to maybe have a presentation from you at some point.
Yes.
Kind of like show your setup and all your tricks that you've just discussed. So
Yeah, I mean,
set
I had
that
a
up sometime.
presentation for you once, and like, I believe like there has been many improvements, significant improvements. 6 meter is still like, my old 6 meter, what I call a version 1, now I'm on version 3 of the antennas, and that's a really completely different beast.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've worked you many times better, and we're gonna have to, like I say, I'll send you an email or something.
Sure.
All right.
Paul, could I make a 1-second advertisement, 5-second advertisement for anybody who is not signed up for FFMA? Look at Kilo Victor 5 Delvia's QRZ page, and that will tell you how to get on the FFMA leaderboard list. Thank you.
Good.
Cool. Yeah,
That
that's
was
a good
great.
thing.
Great. Any other last minute comments before we wind this down, and I'll publish it on the YouTube page. And I've also got a copy of Peter's presentation that I'm going to put in the files section of the Front Range Community Group IO page.
Thank you for the presentation, Peter.
Very welcome.
Just unbelievable. I mean, I just can't believe what you've done and what you're doing. It's just amazing how you reminded me of Edward Deming. I don't know if you know him, but
Oh, yeah.
he's the guy who did all this continuous improvement stuff. when I
Yes.
was- when I was
That's,
working.
by the way, that's the motivation.
Yeah, I took his course when I was with Northern Telecom. So,
Mhm.
all right, well, great seeing you, and
Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
I'll be looking for your signal on the Rover.
Okay. Well, good night, everyone.
All right, good guy.
Thanks, Paul,
care,
for
guys.
putting it up.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks, Peter.
My pleasure, guys.
Thank you.
Night all.